Good afternoon, everybody. Just about afternoon. I think we're a few seconds past midday there. Welcome to the Swoop for Advisors webinar on what's new at Swoop and how to get the most out of it. I'll just wait for a minute or so, just in case anybody is trying to log in or has been held up waiting for a cup of tea to brew, something like that. And then we'll get on with things. This should take us about 20 minutes. So we should be done by 12:30. You should be able to go and get your lunch then if you haven't already. And then we will be sending the recording afterwards in any case. There is a chat feature that my colleague Laura has kindly set up. So if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to put them in there, and then I'll try to answer them either as you ask them or wait till the end, just depending on how we're getting along. But just give that another moment or two for any late arrivals. Okay, I think we'll kick off there. Again, we'll be sending the recording out afterwards, so no need to wait too long just at the moment. So yeah, as we say, hopefully you can see my screen there. We'll just go through some changes that we're making, some of the reasons why we're doing that, and then some new features to Swoop and potential ways of actually enhancing the partnership that we've had with many of you for a couple of years now. So you'll see that on the agenda there. We have, I think, been working with a number of you for a while now, but sometimes it's the case that we haven't done a lot of work together, sometimes not very much at all. And in some cases, I think you joined us either in 2022 or even before then as well, when the advisor channel itself within Swoop was quite new. So I thought this would be a good time to bring everyone up to speed on those new changes and the changes as well that we're making to the platform itself. One of these, as you'll have seen quite probably from the email that we sent out to you last week, is that we are actually closing platform access for legacy account holders. These are what we used to call the starters access to the platform there. So that was free access where you could self-serve for clients and see what was possible. The reason why we're doing this is because fundamentally, when you have so many products as we have across loans, grants, savings, equity, it's actually quite unfair to foist all of that upon an accounting practice or a bookkeeper or an FD or a VCFO or business coaches and say, there's all of this information, go ahead, go for your life. Because actually what tends to happen is you're busy enough, you've got enough on your plates. I mean, right now you've probably got staff, if you do have staff working with you who might be taking annual leave, it's difficult to get more. Time is a real pressure. So actually, in reality, what we saw was there wasn't a lot of engagement, and we were frustrated because we weren't able to provide as much support as we wanted to. That we actually find helps accounting firms, bookkeepers and FDs, advisors in general, get the most out of this, do the most for their clients, support them most thoroughly and regularly and frequently throughout the year, but also help those accountancy practices, for example, those advisors grow their fees, grow their retention and referral, and even things like staff retention. So we've decided that actually what we need to do is split the service into two possible pathways. So we'll go into this shortly, but we'll be working on a purely ad hoc referral basis, where if you really don't get questions from clients about funding very often, maybe you get it once a year and you just want someone to ask the question, can you help this client? We can do that. But then at the same time, with the paid versions of the service that you've already no doubt heard of previously, we've lent into additional features, both in the tech, but also in the support that we give alongside. As we say, it's difficult to provide the level of support that we want to without a really proactive and involved relationship. And this is getting more and more pertinent as we go on. We see from SMEs and we hear from advisors as well that both their clients are wanting them, generally speaking, to do more in the world of advisory, and that can be funding, it can be business planning, growth support, guidance, it can be linking things with management accounts and budgeting and forecasting. So the demand from SMEs is growing and growing and growing from their accountants, and especially at a time like this where the money flow in that the economy can be a little tight. Inflation has been a problem. Hopefully we're on the right side of that now, and we're seeing some positive signs from the Bank of England, shall we say, and hopefully they will continue throughout the year. it's harder and harder for firms to find the funding and the support that they need. And while there are more lenders than ever, that actually can make the market an even more confusing place. So for them to be able to go to their accountant, get around the lack of support for banks, and try and get better access to funding is the first part of the equation, really. And you can actually see here some research from the British Business Bank that 39% of SMEs want more services from their accountant and bookkeeper, not less. So you're in a position, as you know, where for a lot of owner managed businesses, there's no one else who's going to be able to give them better advice or better guidance than you can. And it's really important that we can support that as well. What we've also seen in the market, certainly when it comes to debt, is that 59% of funding is not coming from big banks, but it's coming from challenger banks and specialist lenders. And again, how do we access that? A client might want to go on Google and they could spend, all day at a great opportunity cost, I'm sure, working in work rather than on the business, searching for this, and still end up paying a very expensive price. So with the ability to use a comparison tool, that's where we can find the best results. But the biggest, I think, nugget here is that an SME, according to the British Business Bank, the government-backed bank, an SME is 4 times more likely to be able to achieve funding. And that's not just debt, that's equity as well, through their accountant or through their advisor than they are on their own. So this is something where you can really help. And most of you, I'm sure, have been really leaning into this, given the changes that we've all seen in the accounting space in the last few years, which seem to continue to be accelerating. And matching that, how can an accounting firm or a bookkeeper or an FD rise to the challenge, especially when we've got problems around time, again, as we addressed earlier, staff resource. There are questions around pricing for some of these new services, which are unprecedented, really, and there aren't necessarily agreed upon practices, whether it's in service fees or whether it's in a timesheet system for implementing this into your structures. And then also, how do you make sure that your staff are aware, that your employees and your team know about funding, that they can relate what might be relevant to clients as and when the need arises throughout the year, not just once a year? And how can we make sure that they have all the tools that they need in terms of knowledge of the funding space, if they don't have it already, and specific insights for that client? And how can those firms then quickly access those options without having to trawl Google and trawl the marketplace themselves? Similarly here, you can see some more figures. Now, this is from Spotlight, some research at the end of last year. And this is a global trend, but it's something that I think is reflected in the UK as well, where 65% of firms are describing themselves as progressive. Most of them are working on offering more services to meet this challenge from SMEs, which has come from the grassroots up, I suppose. And actually, a lot of the advisory services that we help support with in funding, but also other areas, these are now overtaking things like forecasting in 2023. So VCFO and advisory work is now making up 23% of the revenue for accountancy practices around the wealthy world. This is obviously a quick change, and more firms will be leaning into this, and more of them will be looking for an edge as well. And that, of course, is where we'd like to say we can come in too. So what do we do? You'll know much of what we do, I think, from some previous conversations that we've had. You've probably almost all seen a version of this graphic here, where, of course, we work across 300 lenders on the debt side. Just in the UK, we have access to over 550 grants, actually, as of this morning, savings, and a panel of about 200 investors as well. We're also working now in Canada and the US and South Africa and Australia, in addition to our traditional home markets of Ireland as an Irish company, founded in Dublin by 2 KPMG accountants, and also in our UK operation, which is the bread and butter. So if you do have clients that are working across those barriers, we can actually marshal the various teams around the world into supporting you from, if you like, both sides of the pond, for example, in the case of the US. And they all have their own panels of lenders, of investors, of partners that they work with. But this just pertains to our UK operation, which is in many ways the bread and butter of what we do. But there are some things that you may not be familiar with that we've added in the last year or so to our roster. And just starting at the top on the debt side, of course, we've always tried to cover the whole of the market when it comes to debt. But there are some areas around cash flow where there are some new, actually quite innovative products that have entered the market, and some quite interesting possibilities for clients where they may not have thought there were. For example, on the invoice financing, or specifically invoice factoring side, we've started working with a lender called Triver, Triver. Welcome, obviously, to Google them yourself. And they're offering some very interesting rates, including near instant approval for invoice factoring. And we could be looking at 1 to 3 month terms here. And then they charge 0.06% interest today. So as a tool that's very flexible, and one that in the short term can actually be quite affordable and certainly help an SME owner sleep better at night, that's something that we're able to advise on. So we have a team of 30 funding managers here, which has probably grown, I think, since the last time we spoke to you, and they're specialized across these various areas of funding, including debt. And they'll be able to support you on that. On the grants and R&D side to the right, there are more grants than ever on the platform, 550 plus, as we say. That's the most comprehensive grant finder tool in the UK. And we've actually added an in-house R&D tax credit team to Swoop in the last year or so. If any of you have tried to look for R&D tax credits in the market in the last few years, you'll have seen that it can be a difficult process. It can be a bit of a wild west out there as well. There are a number of, shall we say, sharks with less than thorough ethical priorities, perhaps we could say. So we decided that rather than work with an external partner, we'd actually take this in-house. So we have a brilliant R&D team that's growing, headed up by Sahil, who's a lawyer and an accountant. And if you have clients who have genuine cases that are a good fit for the scheme, to the letter and the spirit of what the scheme is intended for, we're very happy, and we're able to take those from start to finish for you now, where previously we wouldn't have been able to do that. We're obviously looking for cases there where it's going to reflect well on the client, it's going to reflect well on yourselves as a business owner and as their advisor, and on Swoop as well. So we're not looking to fit a square peg in a round hole, but we can absolutely rely on the expertise to take that from start to finish, and even look at things like advances for R&Ds too, whilst looking into, say, grants at the same time. A number of areas that we've added on the savings piece as well. Now, the savings area itself is a really good way to deliver some quick wins for clients, especially if you've got those ones who, they may not be borrowers, they may not want to borrow, they may never borrow. On any given Thursday afternoon, the chances are that 80 to 90% of your clients are not looking to borrow at any time. So this is something that we can do to support them. And it means you can be seen to go out of your way to give them a more proactive service. But then this can also lay the foundation for further conversations on funding that might actually lead to more significant inquiries from them, and services that we can provide, maybe around debt, maybe around investment if they're looking to grow. But two big areas here are the addition of insurance, business insurance, which we can now compare, and pensions. So with this, we can find any manner of business insurance, from key person to indemnity to property, and obviously similarly broad options on the pension side as well. This is in addition to things like energy, which we've always seen as being a really useful option to provide for clients. If any of you are using auto entry or Dext and you have the utility statements for clients already, you can share those with us, and then we can find usually 10 to 30% off what they're paying. If that means that they don't need to borrow, that's fantastic. If it means they can afford to borrow for growth, that's also fantastic. If it means they can potentially justify some more of your services, then that's a win as well. But it can change the conversation for them, and change the conversation that you're able to have with them around things like cash flow and around funding as well. And then finally, on this piece, on the equity team, we have brought aboard a new head of equity called Sarah Mee, who some of you might already have spoken to. And she has put together a number of packages. So where we've always been able to review pitch decks and put them in front of our panel of 200 investors, what we can now do is actually support clients in getting closer to being investor ready. So there are packages that involve access to pitch deck builders, advice from our equity team on what is the most appropriate course of action, or what's going to be most appealing to particular groups of investors or the panel as a whole, valuations, credit checks, R&D checks, grants checks at the same time. So together, through the process, your clients will have a really firm idea of actually, is this something that's going to be of interest to investors or not? And they'll be able to put their strongest foot forward on that as well. Now, we still have a portal, which some of you will have seen, potentially some more recently than others. And this is where, as advisors, you can add a client very quickly. Then we can do a bit of a search on what debt might be available, equity, grants, or savings, and they're all available on here. The savings piece itself is semi-integrated into the platform at the moment, so you'd still be talking to our dedicated success team, who you may have access to already, some of you, and they're the ones who can pursue those options for you. But it's quite intuitive. And a quick reminder on this, we don't do any credit searches for using that platform, soft or hard, and we do not share the data with anybody externally until, of course, we are instructed, for example, to make an application with a specific lender. So it's something that you can use proactively or speculatively for clients and indeed for yourselves as well. There's lots of accountants who find funding through the portal itself. This is in addition to a white label version, both of which actually have continued to be updated. So there are new features on these portals. For example, the option to search through all grants in one list. So typically the grant finder works on location and sector. Now you can actually search through all products and make sure you're not missing anything for the client. And they're all in one place. Same with debt options and the same with investors as well. Just makes it a lot easier. And of course, there's more tech coming along the way. And we do have Sage and Xero integrations. We have actually entered a global partnership with Sage as of last October. So we're working more closely than ever with them, but we have integration, as we say, with Xero too, and also QuickBooks on that. Some of the team, for a bit of a refresher on the staff here, you can see me looking a little smarmy in the bottom left there. My job alongside Sam is to work on the business development. So we have the privilege of talking to new accounting firms and re-engaging ones that we haven't necessarily spoken to for a little while, bookkeepers and FDs too. And then Laura Jochimson, who you can see on the bottom right, is my colleague who's helping host the webinar today. And then between herself and Laura Ostergaard, Nana and Annie, they constitute our success team. So you would be working with them going forward, and it's their job to think proactively, do things like client reviews, support you with implementation, marketing, etc., so that you are actually making the most out of this and getting real results for clients rather than, again, having this quite expansive platform and no helping hand through the process. The support, again, that you get from that success team, and we start working together very, very quickly on this, is around things like segmentation of clients. So do we have sectors that your clients work in that might be eligible for grants or R&D or investors? Are there borrowers, non-borrowers? Are there those with cash reserves that we can potentially look at helping with savings accounts, high interest savings accounts? What does your team need from us as well in terms of education support? Not everyone is going to be a funding expert. Some of you may actually be. It's a broad spectrum, but anything that we can do, again, as I said earlier, to help your team understand and grow and promote advisory services to their clients is what we consider our job to be, as an extension of your team, in effect. We can also support with marketing, with process. For example, how do we link this with conversations? How do we link funding into conversations around, say, budgeting and forecasting? Because if you can link that, it actually raises the salience of all of them. What is the relevance of funding in the context of management accounts? How can we help you cross-sell based on precedent that we've seen from some of the 168 firms that we're working with just in the UK? And then similarly, how can we think about pricing this? Can we help you build this into your Go proposal from the very beginning so that funding is always part of the conversation with new clients? How can we suggest best ways perhaps to charge for writing grants for clients, or finding them energy savings, or finding them banking, or giving them access to funding? This is going to depend on your priorities, how you see this as a service. Is it a value add? Is it something that you want to genuinely be a real core part of your revenue stream, MRR? And that's something that we can help with as well, because there's a different horse for every course. I'll just, skipping around there a little bit, I'll just go after that to the new ways in which we partner. So going back to what we said at the top, we will be switching off free access to the standard platform, and instead there will be two essential main flavors of how we can help. So the first is essentially an ad hoc referral system, whereby we can send you an inquiry form that's just one page online. You can fill it in on behalf of a client, and then you can choose whether we speak to them or we speak to yourselves. We do not speak to clients without expressly being asked by yourselves. So you remain in control of that conversation and control of the relationship, but it's up to you. And that basically means that you or the client will be contacted by our funding team, depending on the type of funding that you're looking into, and we can simply directly go to market and find what the best results are going to be for them there. This is going to pertain to equity and debt alone. So anything to do with grants and savings, that's now going to be on the paid versions of the platform. So the reality is most of the requests you get from clients will likely be around debt. And so that's where the focus is. That's why the focus is on that, in order to be able to do something for what potentially will be the most likely requests there. And then on the other side, on the paid versions of the platform, we've actually now split this into a number of possible options. So as you can see, some of these start from £90 a month for bookkeepers and FDs in particular, or sole practitioners, where there's a use case where there are a number of clients who would benefit, but we're not necessarily talking about a rollout to, teams and teams and teams and dealing with hundreds or thousands of clients. And it's a way that you can still use the platform, still benefit from all of the support that we've spoken about, and still actually benefit from some introducer commission as well. And I should say that we are in partnership with the ICAW. You don't need a DPB license to work with us. Everything that they require in terms of requirements around advanced consent and specific consent, we comply with, and we can even share letters of engagement actually that they've signed off on. So anything around commission there, we don't need to be worrying about ethical quandaries on that, as we are signed off by the ICAW, working very closely with them. The outgoing head of our channel actually is the president of the West and North Yorkshire ICAW, so we have to make sure that we're playing ball particularly in that case. And then at the other end of that spectrum, going through a platform for advisors with smaller teams, where there's actually a certain amount of education rollout and marketing support that they will require. And then on to larger firms where we have enterprise solutions and options for white labeling, where your clients can go onto your website and use a version of the platform that we've designed for you with your branding and colors. So hopefully that's given just a bit of a sense of where we've come from and where we're going. We will be switching off free access to the platform, but we'll be offering a slimmed down version of access to debt and equity for those of you who do not get many requirements on funding from clients, perhaps those of you who don't particularly want to be doing more work in this. And then at the other end, for those firms that want to get more engaged with this, be part of the 57% earlier that we saw doing more, we provide more in the way of services, both on the platform and on the funding side, but also in terms of the customer success team, which actually was put in place last year and we've added to since then. So again, we'll be sharing this webinar with you afterwards. And I would suggest that if you wanted to have a conversation and pick up where we left off with you, whether it was a few weeks or a few months or a couple of years ago, you'll have access to my diary, so you can book in a meeting, and it'd be good to make reintroductions and catch up with you. In the meantime, if you have any questions, I'll allow a moment and you can put them in the chat just now, but obviously feel free to reach out to me separately. My email address is ryan@swoopfunding.com, nice and simple. Despite being an Irish company, I am the only Ryan here apparently, which helps make it considerably easier for people to remember your email address. But again, I'll just give a moment there for any final thoughts or questions. And I think if that's it, I think some of you might be having your eye on the clock for lunch. If that is it, we will leave it there. But again, feel free to reach out to me with any questions by email or book into my diary if you want to have a conversation further. It'd be good to catch up. Thanks a lot.